So tonight I just wanted to kind of go in a different direction. I know we kind of met for past few weeks. And so tonight I just want to go through um, kind of like airport information and airport markings, and hopefully we can knock that out tonight. And if that's the case, then we'll do that. And then next week, if we do not get through this, then hopefully we'll just go through the rest of it. But this is kind of a shorter section. I thought I'd throw this in here in the middle of while we're talking about all the aerodynamic stuff and um, some of the other bigger topics. Um, so the first thing that I kind of want to talk about is what's known as the chart supplement. So the chart supplement is a book that has, well, it's actually a collection of books that the FAA puts out very regularly. In fact, the next edition here, well, it looks like the current edition is good till, let's see, they say on the cover. So this book is good for the 25th of February, 2021 at 091 Zulu. So up until that point, this book is accurate. And the point of having this book is you don't have to reissue sectional charts as often. So the sectional charts are on a rotating basis. And so the sectional charts get updated every so often. And then everybody has to get new sectional charts or download the current sectional chart or whatever that may be. And so in the intermediate period between when they issue new sectional charts, the FAA puts out the chart supplement. And the chart supplement goes along with the sectional charts, and it provides information about airports that are located in that region. And it might update some things that were not previously on the sectional chart or whatever. So we're going to look at an example of what an entry looks like in a sectional chart supplement. And we're going to learn a little bit about how airports are laid out, parts of the airport, and then we're going to talk about airport markings eventually. So we're going to start here. You can find these online. They do sell them in print as well, but unless you actually need to do some navigational work, the online ones will work for you. And so this is what they look like. So this is the cover. So they say chart supplement, and then they'll have the region that it's good for. And then they'll have the effective date and the times that it's valid for. And so this one is the East Central United States Chart Supplement. And so it's good for Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. So these booklets are organized first by kind of like, your general table of content stuff. And then they kind of give you some like examples so that in case you forget what any part of this means, you can go back, look at the sample, and then look at the number and figure out what it's talking about, because there's a lot here. And to be honest, I don't even know what some of these things mean, and some of them are rarer depending on what the airport does and who it services. And so you might not be familiar with what a certain thing means. So you can go up and look what it's talking about. So yeah, they have this example, and then they give you the legend for that example. So like here, they'll have the legend for what this little map, what each of these little icons means. Then you can look here and figure out what it's talking about. And then they give you the rest of the numbers. So you can look at, say you want to know what one means, the city name. So you go on here, look at one, and you're like, city airport name. Yes, this is the name which the airport, or the name of the city that the airport is in. And so that's pretty handy to reference. So that's in the front. And then eventually, once you get past the example portion, you'll start getting into the actual chart supplement. And so everything is organized alphabetically. So first organized by state. So each of the states is at the top here. And so it starts out with Illinois, since that's first in the alphabet. And then it starts with cities. And then if there are multiple airports in the same city, then it'll organize those alphabetically. So it goes state, city, and then airport name. And then these ones at the top here, which are not part of a city, these are just extraneous things that are out there. So these are like non-directional beacons and FORTACs and navigational aids. So that's kind of how they're organized. Now, I pulled up Grand Rapids, Gerald R. Ford International Airport, and I thought we could just go through this and kind of talk about what an entry means and what kind of information is available here, because these are really great resources when you're planning flights. And if you want more information about an airport, this is a great place to look. This is where you can get like the tower frequencies, runway lengths, obstacles, and yeah, there's really great pieces of information. So the first thing that you'll notice is you have a drawing of the airport. Now, this isn't a very detailed drawing as far as like taxiways and stuff goes, but this drawing is used more for identifying hazards that might be around the airport, identifying what kind of lighting they have, identifying what kind of glide slope information they have, windsock location, tower location, general layout of the airport. It also gives us information about the surrounding area. Are we in the middle of a big city? Are we in the middle of a countryside, whatever. So this drawing here, let me zoom in on this, make it bigger. So we have 3 runways. So these are the black lines, and 2 of them are parallel, and it gives us the names of the runways. So we have 8 left and 8 right, and then 26 left, 26 right, and then we have 17 and 35. And those are the headings of the runways. Now, as it turns out, the actual headings, if you were to go out onto the runway and check the runway headings at Grand Rapids, these are not correct. They're actually off by about a degree. But as it turns out, it costs a lot of money to repaint and re-update all the information out there, saying that Grand Rapids has 8 right, 26 left. And so they have left them for the time being, but I think they are going to update them in the future. But that's just due to the precession of the Earth's magnetic field. Since these are magnetic headings, they need to be updated periodically. And so, yeah, but for now, those are the names. So we have 26 left, 26 right, 8 left, and 8 right. And then we have the 1735 runway. The runway information includes lighting, it includes the name, and it also includes the length. So right here, we have the length and the width of each runway. So 8 right, 26 left has a length of 10,001 foot, and it has a width of 150 feet. Runway 35 and 17 has a length of 8,501 feet and a width of 150 feet. And then 8 left 17, or 8 left 26 right has a length of 5,001 feet and 100 feet wide. So in addition to that, I said it has lighting. So this little box here at the end indicates the pattern of the lighting that is at the end of the runway. And so only 8 right, 35, and 26 left have this kind of alignment system. And so these lights with the extended center line will help bigger airplanes line up on the center line as they're landing. The smaller runways and the runways used less frequently do not have those. So, but it gives you, in case you were flying in there, you'd know what that runway had and what pattern they were in. Let's see. We also have information about the windsocks. So These little triangle things here, and here shows the location of all the windsocks around the airport. So if you're landing, you know where to look for these windsocks to make crosswind corrections or whatever it may be. This one in particular has little things coming out of the front of it. And this indicates that this windsock is lit. And so at night, you'd be able to look at this windsock and see what direction the wind is blowing. The other thing we can see is we have information about what type of glide slope indicators are available on the runways. So for instance, runway 35 here has a little circle with a P in it. And that P is a PAPI. And we haven't really talked about the different types of glide slope indicators. But if you've played Microsoft Flight Sim or X-Plane or some other flight simulation game, or you've been in an aircraft recently, and you've looked out the window while you're landing, on the side of the runway will be, and they're usually about somewhere around just before the 1,000 footers or really close to the end of the runway. So these glide slope indicators are adjusted so that you'll be on a 3-degree glide slope. Sometimes they're steeper, but generally it's a 3-degree glide slope. And so they're little lights basically. And depending on how they're arranged and what colors they are will determine what name they're given. So these are PAPIs. And so they are 4 lights that are all right next to each other. So all in a horizontal line. And they'll go from white to red depending on your glide slope. And so the ideal situation, you'll see 2 red and 2 white. And that means that you're on that 3-degree glide slope. Up here on the smaller runway, 8 left and 26 right, we have a V, which is for a VASI, which is very similar to a PAPI, except that they are stacked instead of right next to each other. So you have 2 in front and 2 in back. But the same concept, 2 white and 2 red, means that you're on glide slope. So yeah, that's basically all the information. It also gives us little indicator A5 here, which indicates the type of lighting, but I'm not really going to go too much depth there. So besides the runways, it gives us information about taxiway layout very generally. We'll look at another piece of information that's put out that gives more details about that, but it gives you basically the general layout, no names or anything, but you could navigate around, I suppose. It also gives us information about building locations. So we see over here, for instance, we have a large cluster of buildings. This is their corporate section of the airport. So these are all corporate hangars. And then over here we have, this is the FBO of the airport. So this is where the main ramp is. And then over here, actually, somewhere, I don't remember where, they just put a new one in actually. And so there's another FBO over here. There's some maintenance over on this side of the field, but you wouldn't be able to know that from this chart. I'm just rattling on about this airport. So anyway, building locations. It also gives you information about where the terminal is. So the terminal is over here, and you kind of see the ramp and the bridges. It also tells us the tower location. So see here TWR, and then it's pointing to this little star. So that's where the tower is. And so, yeah, so that's pretty much all the information given about the airport. It's pretty helpful for a general high-level overview. That's all this is really meant to be. Outside the airport, we see roads. So all these things, highways and roads, and depending on the size, will depend on how wide they are. So bigger highways like these will be 2 lines, and smaller roads will be, single lines. It also tells us information about tree location, so or obstruction information. So all these little things out here are all possible obstructions or trees or what have you. We also have information about what type of area each part of the outside of the airport is in. So we have like an industrial area and a residential area over here. So that's helpful for determining Maybe, you know, I don't know, there might be a lot of concrete over here. And so when you're landing, you might have to take that into consideration on a hot day. You know, you might hit that big concrete patch and you might balloon a little more or whatever. But just general information about the surroundings of the airport. So that's kind of a high level overview. And like I said, you can check out the legend up here for more information about what all the things mean. But that's in the front. So next, we're going to kind of go through each line and talk about what it means. So starting from the top, we have the city. So this airport is in Grand Rapids, which is actually kind of counterintuitive because if you actually know where this airport is at, it's actually in the city of Kentwood. However, the airport itself actually has a small bit of land that it's on inside Kentwood that is part of Grand Rapids. So this airport is in Grand Rapids, even though it's in Kentwood. Next is the official name of the airport. So this airport's often called Grand Rapids, but the actual name is the Gerald R. Ford International Airport. And then it gives us the identifiers. So we have the US identifier, so GRR, and then we have the ICAO, or international identifier. So we have the K appended to the front, indicating this is a United States airport. Next we have, I'm just going to skip over some of this because some of it's not as useful, but I'll hit the major stuff. So don't have to worry about that. Here we have the time offset. So we are 5 hours behind UTC, or 5 hours behind or ahead. No, wait. We are, 5 hours behind UTC. And then during daylight savings time, we are 4 hours. We have the lat longe of the airport. We have the airport elevation. And this is stuff that you can generally find on a sectional chart, but we'll start getting into stuff that's not on there. B indicates that I have a rotating beacon. LRA, now this is one of those things that you might not see all that often, but LRA is just talking about how this airport can process customs. So this airport technically can process customs. So you could land here if you flew over the border. So let's say you flew from Canada to Grand Rapids, you could clear customs at Grand Rapids. I'm going to kind of skip over this. It's just to deal with like fire suppression systems and the fire crew training and what kind of stuff they have. And I'll skip over those two. So next we have information about the runways. So here we have runway 8 right, 26 left. So that's the long one. The first thing it gives us is the length and width. So we have a 10,001 foot by 150 feet. It tells us the type of material it's made out of. So we have concrete and it is grooved. And then we get some other information, and then we have the type of lighting. So in this case, it is high intensity runway lighting. Then we get more information split up by each side of the runway. So going down 8 right, we have medium approach lighting, or medium approach lighting, medium intensity approach lighting, and it has runway alignment indications. So it tells you whether or not you're aligned. So that's these things out here. And then same thing with 26 left. And it tells us that 26 left has a PAPI. and it tells us that it is 4 bars to the left. And we can see down here 26 left with the PAPI, and it tells us 4 bars left. And it tells us the glide slope of that PAPI. So standard is 3 degrees, and this is 3 degrees. The next bit of information here is touchdown point. So touchdown 73 feet. So that glide slope will get you to that touchdown point, 73 feet in. All right, runway 1735, similar thing, width, length, concrete grooved, high intensity runway lighting. Now this runway 17 has runway end identifier lights. Now these are little lights that are on the end of the runway that flash and basically show you where the end of the runway is. So you can very quickly see with your peripheral vision where that end is, and so you don't have to constantly focus and try and figure out if you pass the threshold or not. So it's pretty handy to have on at night. This has a PAPI, and it's 4 bars to the right of the runway. Has a glide slope of 3 degrees and a touchdown point of 50 feet. And then the other side of the runway 35, medium intensity approach lighting with the runway alignment system. And this also has a PAPI 4 bars to the right and glide slope and touchdown point. Runway 8 left and 26 right. Same thing as above, but this one is asphalt and it's grooved. So it's a little bit different material, and if you flew into Grand Rapids, you'd see that it was black instead of gray. So this indicates kind of the amount of weight that you could put on it. You could put a lot more weight on a concrete runway, way more than you could on an asphalt runway. So that's just kind of an immediate indicator. And it's a smaller runway too, so you're probably not going to fly too much in there. That would break it. The next section here has to do with the available runway distance. So each of these numbers, so for instance, we have takeoff run available. So this is the length of the runway that you can use while your wheels are touching the ground to roll down the runway before you take off. Now, this number is the same as the length of the runway in this case, but some runways may have sections that you can use to take off, but not necessarily land on. So there might be sections before the runway that are not as thick and concrete, and so you might be able to roll out onto them and take that runway length and add it to the total distance. So you might have a 100-foot pad at the beginning, so they might add that onto the total. Same thing with the landing distance available. So this LDA number, they might have some portion of the runway that you can roll off onto the end, but you might not be able to touch down at that point. So different things like that can be added in these totals, but in this case, this runway does not have any of those. You have your takeoff distance available. So this is the length of the total takeoff run length available, plus the rest of the runway section. And then you have available or accelerate stopping distance available. So from an accelerating to fully accelerate and then to stop again, this is the total distance that you have available. And then it gives you for each runway what those numbers are. In this case, since there are no extensions to the runway and there's no EMAS or anything to help stop an aircraft that goes over the runway, these are all the lengths of the runway. So this next section talks about what kinds of services they have available at the airport. So this is an S4 class airport, which I believe has to do with the amount of repairs that they can perform. So they have almost full capability there. They serve 100 low lead and Jet A, so you can get those there. They also serve oxygen. And it gives information about the lighting. So we see as above, we have medium intensity approach lighting on these runways. We have runway end identifier lights on this runway and this runway and this runway, high intensity runway lighting, and then medium intensity runway lighting. So that's just more detailed information. Then we have a big section here that just gives us a bunch of information about using the runway. This isn't as hard to decode as it's pretty much in plain English, so you can read that on your own time if you feel so inclined. Then it gives us information about the airport manager, so if we had any questions, we could call that number. It gives us frequencies to use for weather, so it gives us the ASOS frequency, as well as a phone number to call. So if you call this number, you will get the same things as if you tuned into this frequency. We also have information about the CTAF and the ATIS and the Unicom. So the CTAF, when the airport tower is closed, will be on 135.65. The ATIS, which is weather information, will be on 118.725, which is the same number as the ASOS. And then the Unicom frequency, which is used to communicate with the FBOs, is on 122.95. Then it gives, some other frequencies which are used for when you arrive or depart Grand Rapids. You might be on Chicago Center frequency or Great Lakes Approach departure. Those are also good frequencies to know if you're flying around the area. And then it gives us the actual tower number or the frequency. So Grand Rapids Tower is on 135.65. And then it tells us that the tower is operational 10:30 to 5 Zulu. So after or between the time of 5 to 10:30, the tower will not be operational. And so you would have to use the CTAF. We have ground frequency and clearance delivery frequency, and then it gives us some more information about clearance delivery. So overall, it's a very detailed informational section on the airport. Oh, whoops, I have more down here apparently. So it just gives you more information about some of the instrument approaches and what's allowed and nav aids and stuff like that. So yeah, so very detailed in the information available. So these are great resources for, planning flights and seeing what airports have, runway lengths available, what services they have, what are the frequencies. So yeah, and you can find these just by searching chart supplement and then finding the right one for your area and then finding the airport that you need. So does that make sense? Is there any questions about anything on here or anything I talked about?
Seems doable once you take the time to read through all the legends and keys.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. It is very overwhelming if you have never seen a lot of these abbreviations. They really love their abbreviations, and so yeah, having that key is really handy to just kind of decode as you go through and just learn what some of these abbreviations mean. But yeah, I definitely agree. But it does make it very small and very concise. So if these were all spelled out, it would take up much more paper. So yeah.
When it comes to like a private pilot, how important is it to understand, like, you're saying the asphalt versus concrete runways and all the other, like, I guess, smaller nuances? How important is it that we understand all of those things?
So, I mean, as far as your like written exam goes, you might see they might give you a page like this and ask you a question about a certain part. I don't remember getting one like that, but they might be out there. More often than not, you'll see this come up in the oral exam when you're taking your check ride. they'll probably bring out a chart supplement, or they'll ask you to use a chart supplement, and they'll ask you a question about, I don't know, what is the what are the lighting availabilities on runway 8 right? And so you'll come over here and you'll read, runway 8 right has a medium intensity approach lighting system, or whatever. And so they'll probably ask you a question like that, and they might ask you a question about, what services they have, or they might ask you to read a section or something like that. But in general, knowing your basic information, that's all they're looking for. And in reality, on your oral exam, you can't do this all that often, but they're okay if you say, I don't know the answer to that question, but I know where to find it. And so the answer in this case would be to look at the legend and figure out what it's talking about, because they know you're not going to be able to know everything. And so, they're okay if you have to look something up, because that means that you know where to find it in case, you're out flying an airplane in real life and you forgot where something was. So does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So yeah. The side note to that, the worst thing you could do on your oral exam is go down a rabbit hole thinking that you're gonna outsmart the examiner, because you might, I don't know, have some information he doesn't or something. But reality is that he knows exactly where to find all of the answers, even if he doesn't know them off the top of his head. So you don't want to do that. So moving on from the chart supplement, we're going to be talking about the airport diagram. This is another publication put out by the FAA, and this is more for reference about the actual layout of the airport and the names of the taxiways and, general information like that. It doesn't have a ton of extra stuff like the chart supplement does, so it won't tell you, where you can get fuel or what kind of fuel they have or whatever. But it will tell you things like runway distances. It'll tell you the headings of the runways. It'll tell you, basic stuff like that. It'll tell you the elevation on each end of the runway. It gives you taxiway names. It gives you hot spots, all kinds of stuff. So I'm just going to kind of take it from the top here. So this is an airport diagram. This is for Gerald R. Ford International Airport, GRR, in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It tells us the frequencies that we need to know. So this is pretty handy. Instead of looking for the chart supplement, you just have this bad boy out while you're taxiing, and gives you all the frequencies you need to know. So you have your ATIS, which is your weather. You have your tower, ground clearance. The only thing it doesn't look like it has on here is the approach and departure frequencies. But they will usually give you those if you're departing Grand Rapids. So you don't have to worry about that, because at Grand Rapids, they actually have two different frequencies. They use one for the north and one for the south. And so they'll tell you which one to use. The next thing you'll notice is that this has lat longe lines, just like a sectional chart does. And so you can figure out the exact lat longe of a point on this chart here just by looking at where the lines are. The other thing they have over here is the variation. So this is the number that you use when you're doing flight planning to calculate your actual heading that you're going to fly, because the magnetic compass, since it's using the magnetic field of the Earth, is prone to this variation effect, which is the variation between the true North Pole and the magnetic North Pole. And so they give you that. At Grand Rapids, it's 5.8 degrees west. The next thing you'll notice is that it tells us the elevation on each end of the runway. And so this is kind of handy. Now at Grand Rapids, it's not that big of a deal because it's only 2 feet difference. But at some airports, it might be 10, 20 feet difference. 20 feet might be a lot. And so, you might have to take that into consideration as, how is your aircraft going to perform either rolling down the hill or up the hill. So they tell you that information. They also tell you the headings of the runways. So as you can see here, this runway 8 left is 087.1 degrees. This is what I was saying earlier, that these runways need to be relabeled because they are no longer aligned with their magnetic headings. So this should really be 9 left and 27 right. But that costs a lot of money to repaint and update all that information. So, and then just like the chart supplement, it gives us the runway length and runway width. The next thing we have is the taxiways. So we have the taxiway names. So for instance, this taxiway here is Juliet. And then each little thing coming off here that goes to the runway, those are labeled Juliet 1 through Juliet 5. And those are just kind of used for the tower to tell you either where to enter the runway or where to exit the runway. So if you land, they might tell you taxi down to Juliet 4 and take a left, or maybe they'll tell you take off runway 26 right, Juliet 2, or something like that. So you can use those to identify points where the runway connects to the taxiway. So the next thing that we see here that's not on the chart supplement, and this is, as far as I know, the only place that you can really find these, are these hotspot zones. And these hotspot zones are used to tell pilots places in the airport where people often get confused. And I've been out here on these taxiways, and there's a lot of concrete out there, especially in a small aircraft. It gets a little disorienting having all this concrete around you and having taxiway signs that are really far apart and not knowing exactly where you're at. And so it's very easy to kind of get lost and go down the wrong taxiway, or miss the taxiway, or taxi onto a runway or something like that. And so these are there so that you know when you're going through these zones that you should be extra careful as to where you're going and making sure that you're on the right taxiway. So this airport has 3 hotspot zones: hotspot 1, 2, and 3. Some airports have more, some airports have none, just depends. Yeah, just like the chart supplements, it also tells you the building locations. It also tells you the tower location and tower elevation. It tells you field elevation. And yeah, so that's pretty much all the information you need to get from one of these. They're pretty handy. In fact, when we were doing flight training at my flight school, they'd have us print these out for each airport we flew to, just to have on our knee board as we were taxiing around, making sure that we were at the right taxiway. In fact, when they'd give us a clearance, we would take a pen and we'd draw the taxi route on the taxiways so that we knew where we were going visually, and it really helped a lot. So, any questions on these?
I'm curious as to how much of this kind of stuff you mentioned that you'd keep a chart like this on your knee board. How much of that stuff is kind of automated in an aircraft nowadays with, touchscreen avionics and all that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of something you would expect to see, or maybe not if you don't spend a whole lot on your aircraft?
Yeah, well, apps like ForeFlight, which is kind of one of the bigger ones for, general aviation, has these built in, so you can pull it up on your iPad and you can, draw taxi routes or whatever you need to do. So yeah, those are all pretty much in your what they call a digital flight bag. As far as the airlines go, airlines don't necessarily use ForeFlight, but they have very similar products that are inside the aircraft that would provide you with this sort of information so that you can have that available to you pretty readily. But yeah, for us, we did not have iPads or anything, so we had to print this out. But yeah, pretty much all this information, the chart supplement and airport diagrams and stuff like that, that's all available on digital. So yeah, it makes it really easy to pull it up and figure out where you're going.
Okay, cool deal.
Yeah. All right, well, we will move on then with the time remaining to airport markings. So this is a slide deck that AOPA put out, and I find it's really helpful just to kind of go through, all the symbols, and it kind of tells you at the bottom what each symbol means in more detail. And these are kind of used as like a study aid, but we're just going to use them as pictures because I don't have good pictures of all the airport signage. So the first one is this big sign, and most of these, if they're not painted on the runway, will be on a sign next to the, or not on the runway, on the taxiway. Will be on a sign that's right next to the taxiway. They're very hard to miss. They're usually lit. And so you'll see this big sign on the side of the taxiway that says ILS, and it's going to be red, black, and white. And this is just indicating to you that this is a ILS hold short position. And what that means is that when the ILS is being used on the runway in front of you, you should hold short on this line instead of the regular hold short position. So in this picture down here, we see we have the ILS hold lines, which are these two double bars with these vertical lines going between them. And so when you see this on the ground, and this will be requested by the tower. So, at a tower airport, they'll tell you hold short of the ILS holding line or whatever, instead of the normal hold short line. So they'll tell you when to do this, but it's just to help with the interference that you would cause being closer to the runway to the aircraft that's landing with the ILS system. And so, yeah, I'm not going to talk about the regular hold short quite yet. So this sign, which is similar to the ILS, it's red, black border, white letters, tells you where to hold for a runway. Now, in this case, the hold short line is not going to intersect the runway. However, you're going to be taxiing behind a runway. So if an aircraft is landing or taking off, you could easily get blown off your taxiway by taxiing behind them. So this is on a taxiway behind the runway, but it's also going to be on the taxiway leading up to the runway as well. So, and you'll see the markings on the ground. Here, I'll zoom in. You'll see these markings on the ground. These are the hold short for a runway. That's what these markings are. So there'll be two solid lines and then two dashed lines on top of each other like that. And that is the hold short for a runway. And the way you can kind of remember this is that two double lines mean that you should not cross, just like a road. And then seeing dashed lines mean you can cross. So coming across the other way means you can cross, and having double lines means that you should stop. All right, this sign is going to indicate what taxiway you're on. So you'll see the black background with the yellow letter. And along with the chart supplement, this is used to verify, your chart supplement you can kind of use to know where the upcoming taxiways are. And then, not the chart supplement, the airport diagram you can use to tell which taxiways are upcoming. And then you can see which taxiway you're on and verify that by looking at the taxiway location sign. And so right next to the taxiway that you're on, it'll have the letter identifying which taxiway you're on. So this is the taxiway Alpha. Like I was saying earlier, this is the runway boundary sign, or the runway hold short line. So it has the double bar followed by the double dash line. So you can not cross unless cleared the double bars, and then you can cross the double dash lines. In fact, usually they want you to get off the runway as soon as possible. And you want to make sure that you're past the double bars once you're clear of the runway, just so that you're no longer taking up that runway from everybody else. This sign, which is similar to the ILS and the approach hold short signs, is the runway hold short sign. So this will be like, on this case, taxiway Alpha. This is probably on Alpha 1 or something. And this is going to be connecting right to the runway. And so they'll have this hold short sign on this taxiway, indicating this is where you're supposed to hold short for the runway. And it'll tell you the runway headings that go with that runway. So this is runway 1533. It also tells us which way the runway runs. So on the left is the starting point of runway 15, and on the right is starting point of runway 33. And you can see that down here in that diagram. This line, which is similar to the hold short line for a runway, is used in areas that go from movement to non-movement areas. A movement area is a place on the runway, or not a place on the runway, a place on the airport where you're moving around and ATC has control of you, basically. And a non-movement area is somewhere where you can move around freely. That's like a hangar space or an FBO or something like that. So the tower really has no say in what you're doing. But once you cross this line, then you're under their control. So you have to make sure that you contact the controlling agency of that taxiway or runway or whatever prior to crossing this line. So again, you have the solid line for do not cross and then a dash line for crossing. So at an intersection between multiple taxiways, you'll have these taxiway directional signs. The current taxiway will be just like the taxiway indicator, will be black with yellow outline, and then the taxiways that you could turn onto will be indicated with a yellow background and black letters. So you'll see here we have taxiway Charlie going off to our right and left, and then off to the right at an angle we'll have taxiway Alpha continuing, and then we're indicating here that we are on taxiway Alpha. This is the ILS critical boundary sign, which we talked about earlier. This is a no entry sign. Now, basically, if you see the sign, you probably should stop. You probably shouldn't go any further. Usually it's used in situations where either, going any further might be dangerous for your aircraft. So like the taxiway ends, or you're going on to a vehicle only lane or something like that. But yeah, if you see this, just stop and turn around, or ask questions as to why you ended up there in the first place. The runway holding position markings, we talked about those. Like a taxiway, the runway identifier will be on the runway, and so now this will only tell you which runway you're on, not the other direction. So if you're on runway 26, it's not going to say 268. It's going to say 26 for the runway heading that you're going down. So in this case, you're going on runway 22. So it identifies that too. So this sign is used, again, at taxiway intersections to help direct traffic. So if you were to head down taxiway Charlie here, you would end up at runway 2733. And that's just telling you, where to go to get to a certain runway. Talked about those. This is going to be on the runway, and this will tell you which taxiway is off to the side of the runway. So as you're approaching that taxiway, you want to take taxiway Bravo, whatever. This tells you what taxiway you'll get off on if you're to take that exit. If you see an X on a runway, you should not land there because that runway is either decommissioned or it's in service, or they're repairing, something on the runway, and you should not land on that runway. You'll either see this painted over the numbers, or it might be on a sign that's kind of propped up, so that you can see that it might be temporarily closed or whatever. Um, yeah, this one, I can't remember if I've ever seen this one or not. Basically, this is caution, the runway or taxi, or not the runway, the taxiway is ending, and that you should not go beyond that point. Some of these are a little bit more obscure, and you probably won't see these, but the more common ones like this one, or the runway markings, or hold short lines, or whatever, you'll see those for sure. So this is indicating the distance remaining on the runway. So this is measured in thousands of feet. So the further you go down the runway, the smaller these numbers get, and you do not want to, see these numbers get too small, like 1, because that's not a lot of runway. So these will be placed in increments down the runway, and you can see these are like, they look like this. I don't know. And so you'll have numbers, and those indicate how many feet you have remaining in thousands of feet. This is used, to help you line up with the taxiway better. So this has extra markings to help you identify that center line. And they kind of help with lining up for takeoff, basically. But there's not anything regulatory about these. These little chevron markings here indicate that usually this area is not to be used for takeoff. However, they might be used for emergency stopping, or they might be there for protection from erosion. So whatever the case may be, they're not to be used for taxiing onto, and they're not to be used for landing. And they should only be used in emergencies, or for, basically just emergencies. Around the airport perimeters, and sometimes through airport ramps and stuff, you'll see cars traveling around, transporting people around the airport, or getting people out to wherever they need to be. And so there are specific sections designed for these cars, and they're marked as such. And basically, they just keep the cars safe from aircraft traveling around them. And sometimes they'll cross taxiways and stuff, and so where they cross these taxiways, you'll have do not enter signs, so you should not turn on these, because these are not taxiways, and they're not painted as such. Their markings are white, and taxiways markings are yellow. So sometimes they'll also have these like zippered effects. So like this picture shows here, it has kind of this zippered effect, or maybe they'll be straight. Just depends on the runway, or not the airport. Now this, unlike the chevrons, indicates use for taxi and landing. So, and by landing, I do not mean that you can land on this, but I do mean that you can roll out onto it. So usually the displaced threshold is used in a circumstance where either the pavement underneath is not strong enough to take the weight of an aircraft landing, or it might be that they move the threshold up for some reason, whatever that might be. But either way, you can use this to take off, so you can roll out onto this and then take off, but you should not land behind this point, and this indicates that threshold point with these arrows. For taxiway intersections, you'll see these hash lines, and sometimes ATC will give you instructions to stop before a taxiway intersection, just to let other traffic by or whatever. But if you're instructed to taxi to runway 17 via some taxi route, then in general, you do not have to stop at these. You should look before you cross, but unless instructed by ATC, you do not have to stop at these intersection marking points. So this is used in the case where runway threshold is moved ahead of where it used to be. This is similar to a displaced threshold, except for they use different markings to indicate that the actual runway starts here. But yeah, again, this is very similar to a displaced threshold. But you should not use this area for takeoff or landing, unlike the displaced threshold, which you can use for takeoff, and then you can use it for rolling out. So we kind of flew through those. Any questions on any of these markings? I think the best way is just to kind of go through them and look them over. But I can try and answer any questions if you have them.
I don't have any questions on the markings, but maybe more like a general aviation question. So for the private pilot's license, when you get that, is that generally for a specific configuration of aircraft? Like, do you have to go out and get another certificate if you want to fly, again, single engine, but like tail wheel or like a biplane? I guess my conception is it's like a just tricycle configuration Cessna type aircraft, or where's the line drawn for what is encompassed by the general licensure.
Right. So the answer is yes, sort of. So the regulation specifically for smaller aircraft, if you get your private pilot's license in, let's say, a Cessna 172, which is a fixed wing or a tricycle gear, it has fixed gear. It has a fixed pitch propeller, so you can't change the pitch of the propeller blade, and it's definitely not meeting the horsepower criteria. Then when you get your certification in that, you will be certified for airplane single engine land. And basically what that allows you to do is go fly any aircraft which is under 12,500 pounds. It doesn't make more than, I think, 500 horsepower. And it's single engine, and it's not complex, and it's not a tail wheel. And it's not pressurized. That's the other one. So as long as it meets those criteria, which most do, you can fly any of them. So, you can go out, you can fly Cirrus or Piper. I don't know. I can't think of any aircraft names, but any similar aircraft to that, you can go out and fly. Now, if you wanted to go out and fly, say, a tailwheel aircraft, what you have to do is you have to go find an instructor who has a tailwheel aircraft, or you can use your own. And basically they will take you up. They will talk to you about tailwheel aircraft, how they perform, how to, use a tailwheel aircraft, how it's different. They'll give you some flight instruction, and then basically they will just sign your logbook off saying that you have met the criteria necessary to be proficient in a tailwheel aircraft. And that's all you have to do. It's not complicated. And the FAA really doesn't, record that sort of stuff. It's just a logbook endorsement certifying that you have the required prerequisite knowledge to be proficient in a tailwheel.
Okay, that's cool. So it's basically just extra training. There's no actual formal certification.
Right, exactly. Now, where it gets complicated is, and I should say that tailwheel, pressurized aircraft, and complex aircraft, which complex is just having variable pitch prop, landing gear that can, go up and down, and then retractable flaps. Having those things makes it a complex aircraft. Anyway, so those 3 things you have to, go out with an instructor and they'll just certify you and whatever. Now, if your aircraft is, let's say, over 12,500 pounds, then what you have to do is you have to get what's called a type certificate. And so basically you take a check ride in that aircraft, and then instead of getting, like airplane single engine land, what they'll do is they'll give you a type certificate for that aircraft. And so that's how it works with all the larger aircraft. So you get a type certificate in a Boeing 737 or a Cessna Citation or whatever. So yeah, the certification process is kind of weird, but hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. That's pretty cool.
Okay. Yep.
So I gotta do something extra if I want to go get like a turbo prop.
Yeah. But if you get your private pilot's license in a turboprop, then you're good to go.
That's the way to do it, huh?
Yeah, that's the way to do it. But yeah. Well, actually, what most people do is they'll get their private in a Cessna, and then they'll, they might go up and get their commercial in a turboprop or whatever, and then eventually you get your ATP in like a type certified aircraft or whatever you're going to be flying. So, yep. Anything else? All right. Well, with that, that'll be it. Looks like we made it through all that material tonight. So hopefully next week we'll get back to some aerodynamics or something. But with that, that'll be all for tonight.